I want to talk about 3 simple but effective ways to improve communication in your relationships. So, I mean, this is something that, people everywhere. I mean, and it's not just like romantic relationships. There's couples that have problems with communication. It's everywhere. It happens in every relationship pretty much. But it's also with like parents and their kids. It happens with work relationships, with coworkers, with bosses. It happens with friends and family members. So, one of the big things like that we're not really taught enough about is how to communicate. And a lot of people, they, and especially this is with couples, they talk about like, we don't communicate. We need to communicate more. And everything is like, even experts out there and counselors and therapists, are all talking about how to communicate more, how to have communication. But really the big problem in relationships, it's not that we don't communicate. Every relationship, there's communication, right? So it's not that there's a lack of it. The problem is that we're not always aware of how we're communicating. That's the big thing. So we need to become aware of what's going on. What are we really communicating? And how are we doing that, right? What's coming across? How is this all happening? So, for improving communication, I'm going to share with you 3 simple but effective ways. So, the first thing, and this is something that's never talked about, is it has to do with what I call creating safety in your communication. So what do I mean by creating safety? Well, and this happens so much where, with a, if you're married, right? Or you're in a relationship, your significant other, and you want to talk with them, and, maybe they're just not like in a talkative mood, right? And you start pressing the issue, and there's something important you want to talk about. It's been on your mind, and they don't want to talk about it. They're like, denying it. They're like, trying to run away, basically, get out of the conversation, and you keep pursuing it. Or it could be the other way around, where they do that to you, right? And this could be like even a conversation with your kids, how many times you're trying to get your kids to do shit and they don't listen, and we try and push and press the issue and they don't want to hear it, right? So it really, just really kind of puts up a big wall when it comes to communication, right? So what's going on in a lot of these cases is that there's not enough safety being created. What that means is that we tend to have these conversations, or we try to have these conversations at the wrong time, right? So we're trying to do it when somebody is not in a safe place, or when we're not in a safe place. And basically that could be like, your husband comes home after a long day at work, and he's had a real shit day, and he's in a bad mood, and you got some things that you want to talk about, and he comes in the door and boom, right, you're all over it, and he's not in the mood to talk, right? He's basically feeling like he's being attacked. He's in a bad mood, right? We don't want to have conversations, with anybody when they're in that kind of a mood. They're not going to be, ready to open up and talk about, how they feel and all this kind of stuff when they're there, right? So, with safety, it's about really, looking out for those kind of signs. When somebody's not in the right frame of mind, they're distracted, they're kind of disconnected, they are very distant, they are maybe angry, maybe they're sad, things are just going on. It's kind of like negative kind of emotions and feelings that they're dealing with. And this could be the other way around, right? If somebody's trying to talk to you, if this is what you're going through, right? This is where conversations, it's not a real good time to have a conversation, because there's no safety there. Safety is really creating an environment where the people involved in the conversation are free to open up, and there's no like walls, that are being put up. There's nothing getting in the way. There's no distractions. There's nothing on our minds that are kind of pulling us away from, what needs to be discussed, right? So safety first. It's always kind of like the first rule in communication. So the second thing has to do with 3 things. It's blame, criticism, and judgment. And it's mostly when we are blaming somebody else for something, when we're criticizing somebody else, when we're judging somebody else, our significant other, our kids, our, friends piss us off, our coworkers, right? Even your boss, right? Whatever's going on there. So when we're blaming, it's basically like we're not taking our own responsibility for our part in the relationship, okay? And every relationship, at least there's going to be two people involved. So it's a 50-50 deal here. And what that means is that we have 50% responsibility in this relationship. And when we're blaming somebody else, so if you get pissed off because your man doesn't spend enough time with you, or he's not having sex with you, or he's not as intimate as you want, or he's not doing enough to help you around the house, or he doesn't want to communicate, whatever it might be. And this could be guys with ladies too, so I'm not just trying to pick on men, but it's that. And so we, it's very easy to point the finger and kind of blame, right? So it's his fault that, I'm pissed off all the time because he doesn't have sex with me enough, or it's, his fault that I'm, gaining weight because he doesn't make me feel attractive or loved, right? Or he doesn't want to spend time with me, right? It's when we're pointing the finger at other people instead of taking our own responsibility. And that doesn't mean that we are at fault. It doesn't mean that we have to blame ourselves for things and put everything on us. It just means that we need to be accountable and responsible, and that's taking ownership for our part, right? So it's not about blaming somebody else for what's going on. It's really, about acknowledging and taking responsibility for our part, right? So, blame is all about finding fault. And then when we have criticism, what we're doing then is we are finding flaws in the other person, right? So, I'm this way because, he's acting like an asshole, or, if I could trust you, maybe I'd be more open and intimate with you, or, whatever the case might be, right? Maybe I wouldn't, be such a bitch if you were, paid attention to me more often, things like that, right? It's where we're really finding flaws in the other person. And again, this has to do with the same thing, right? Taking responsibility, taking ownership by owning our shit, just taking that responsibility for our part. So we're not blaming, finding fault. We're not criticizing others where we're finding flaws in them to make ourselves right, or to make ourselves feel better, right? Or trying to play the victim, like we're, everything is about everybody else and nothing about ourselves, because relationships really are a reflection of a bit of truth about ourselves, whether we recognize it or not, right? And then the final thing is we have blame, judgment, criticism, and judgment, right? So judgment is when we're coming to final decisions about people, right? This means that, right? This happened and it means that, right? He doesn't have sex. He hasn't had sex with me in 2 weeks. That means that he's got another woman. He's cheating on me, right? Or whatever, and this can apply to any other issue. I know I'm kind of harping on the sex thing a lot, but it's a common thing in relationships. So, but so those are kind of the three killers: when we blame, when we criticize, and when we judge the other person in the relationship. And that just puts up such a big wall. If we can just put that stuff down and just take our own responsibility and take ownership for our part, I'm telling you, when you do that, the wall comes down, and it's so much easier to get somebody else to communicate with you and improve communication when you're willing to look at yourself and your part first, okay? And then the final thing is about coming to agreements. Okay, and what I mean by that is a lot of times when we get into relationships, we have certain expectations of things that are going to happen, what we're going to get from the relationship, what our part in the relationship is, right? We have all these expectations, and a lot of times what happens is people aren't freaking talking about what that should be, and that's coming to agreements, right? So expectations are just a one-sided thing. I think I should get this from the relationship. This is what I'm prepared to give to it. This is what I need. This is what I want, right? And when those expectations aren't met, that's when communication breaks down, anger, resentment, bitterness comes up, right? Everybody's pissed off because their needs aren't being met. When the reality is that if we sit down and we come to agreements about this stuff, where two people agree, about what it is that they're looking to get and give to the relationship and how it should go and, you know, who's doing what and all that kind of stuff. If we just would come to agreements where both people talk about it and both people are heard and both people are listening and both people agree. And that's where it's so much easier to keep communication going, right? Because it's not an expectation where it's a one-sided thing. It's really an agreement, right? So those are really the three things, right? They're simple. It's not rocket science, but they're really effective when you work them, when you do them, when you implement them. They will help to improve communication in a relationship, in any relationship, all right? So those are the things. Safety first. No blaming, judging, or criticizing the other person or other people, right? Take your own responsibility for your part. Doesn't mean you got to blame yourself. Doesn't mean you're at fault. Doesn't mean you're wrong, okay? Just means that you're taking ownership by owning your shit in the relationship. And then finally, coming to agreements rather than having expectations, all right? So I hope that helped you out. I know it's a little bit long of a video, but I really hope that some of this or all of this really helped out. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, let me know, post them up. Till next time, have faith, follow your heart, and trust yourself. Take care.